the principal job of our civil servants. It's to give us honest advice, and it's then for politicians to assess and make decisions on the basis of that advice. I stand by the advice I've made on this file. There's been little challenge to that, frankly, because I think the committee recognises the part that the UK is playing. We haven't brought the conflict to an end. Writing a letter, a campaigning letter, is not usually the disposition of civil servants. Of course they're frustrated. Many of our constituents are frustrated, and you write to your MP. But I stand by the decision that was made by the Perm Sec and the reply that he gave, which I thought was a very thorough and a very good one.
Is it on this point? Back to Tracy.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, just want to press you a little bit further. We hear a lot from aid workers and from civilians and groups from Gaza and occupied territories and across Israeli and Palestinian groups and NGOs about the recognition of Palestinian state and the lack of leadership from the UK and how that void could be filled by pushing ahead with the recognition. And I heard what you said to Monica. Can you tell us a bit more detail about when will be the right time, because we're all very concerned, as you are, as our constituents are, about there being no Gaza left by the time we come to recognise the Palestinian state. We see that from the map and the evidence that you're giving us. So when will those conditions be right?
What the Labour Party said in our manifesto was that we do believe that recognition is important, and we would like to recognise as part of a process. That is the.
Makes it sound conditional,
Sorry?
That makes it sound conditional.
Well, it's the manifesto that you ran on at the last election.
Yeah. It was, so we'd shifted at one point to, it was part of a peace process, but,
well,
and that's been dropped, I believe. So I think what my colleagues trying to find out is what are the conditions.
Let me finish the point. That was the manifesto that all Labour politicians ran on just a year ago. So the debate is this: do you just recognise per se, because you say that the time to recognise has come and the symbolic act of recognising is where we're at, and I suspect, Ms Gilbert, that that's where you are at from what you have said, and I suspect that that's where Ms Harding is at and where the chair is at, that you recognise symbolically, and you accept that even though there are countries in the last year that did that, it has not changed the situation on the ground? Or do you recognise as part of a process? The French have been talking about a process, or trying to get some kind of process, and actually, if we get a ceasefire, you are into a process. But we haven't got a process at the moment. So that is the debate that's going on. And you will appreciate that when we're talking about the UK, we're talking about a permanent member of the UN Security Council. That's why we are in close dialogue with our partners in France. And of course we would like to have a process, because we would like actually to change the situation on the ground and tip it further towards two states. But I recognise that there are some who believe beyond the process the time has come. But I do say to you that recognition per se is not two states, and I actually want to see two states. For me, it's not a symbolic thing, it's about getting to two states and living by the 1967 and the Oslo Accords and achieving that. So that is the debate. It's a legitimate debate. And there are people on either side of that.
Just for the record, it's not for me about symbolism, it's about hope for the Palestinian people and what they have told us when I was on a visit to Israel and Palestine, and it's about leadership from the UK. So for me, it's not about symbolism. I absolutely accept the point that you make, and for decades prior to being in this place, I've also campaigned for a two-state solution. But I think there is more that the UK could do, and I hear your point about diplomacy and what that looks like, but if you if we cannot get to a point where the Israeli government are willing to have that discussion and have that ceasefire, then how do we push that process forward from a UK perspective?
Well, let me be clear, no country has a veto on our decision. It's our decision as to when to recognise and how to recognise. But I'm simply making the point that the act of recognition does not get you two states. It is a symbolic act. Of course, I recognise that it gives Palestinian people hope amidst the terrible, terrible hardship that they're experiencing, both in the West Bank and in terms of Gaza. But I'm sharing with you the diplomatic discussion that rightly we have with partners like France, but also countries like Saudi Arabia and the Jordanians and others, and the Palestinian Authority in relation to when and how, principally because we have wanted to effect change on the ground and tip the balance towards two states. And of course, don't forget that this conference, it was a Saudi-French initiative. It's not at this stage a leaders' conference. That moment has not happened because they too are calculating when best to tip this towards actually getting two states.
You say it's symbolic as though that's a negative thing, Foreign Secretary. I would say the UK recognising Palestine as a state would have a big implication internationally for other countries' determination of how they define, see, recognise and put legal weight around Palestine. Could I ask you on a separate point though, just to be minded that we're scrutinising you as a committee, not as individual MPs, and definitely not on our political backgrounds. So we also have collective responsibility as a committee, so singling out politicians for their manifestos is not that helpful in our duty, if that's okay, Foreign Secretary.
I recognise that you're saying on the committee, but I also recognise you're a group of politicians. I've been in this House for 25 years. You run on a manifesto. It's legitimate for me to remind you the manifesto you run on and why that was the position. You may not like it, but that's the envelope.
I have no
sorry.
I have no issue with you saying Labour politicians have run on a manifesto. It's when you are singling out and making comments about individual members that, as chair, I have an issue with that. If you could be respectful that we have collective responsibility.
Committee chair, I've served on committees. I am being respectful. I am simply referring to committee members by their name. Your names are all around you. I'm being polite.
That's great.
I'm sorry you don't like it, but that's
I have no issue whatsoever with you using our names, but on our names it doesn't say our political parties. So if you could direct to the committee, that would be great, or an answer to their question, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, you've made the point, and I've made my reply. Thank you.
Thank you. James, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The committee recently published its report on international humanitarian law, protection, not